Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the damp covers of a medieval university dorm, your breath fogging the air, your toes curling against the cold stone floor. You wake to a bell, not an alarm, and it's not even yours, it's the town's. A tower bell tolling 6 times, echoing across gray rooftops and through cracked dormitory shutters. That's your cue. You rise from your straw-stuffed mattress, bundled in a wool tunic that smells faintly of fireplace smoke and last week's stew. Welcome to your new life as a medieval university student. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is. I love seeing all the sleepy corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the icy floor, wrapping a second tunic over your shoulders. Your breath puffs out visibly in the pre-dawn gloom. There's no glass in the windows, just wooden shutters that barely keep out the wind. The straw you slept on creaks like it's complaining, and honestly, you're with it. The room smells like cold ashes and wet wool. The mattress. Not really a mattress, just a sack of straw that's been flattened by years of elbows, knees, and overdue regrets. If you're lucky, no rats chewed through it last night, but that's a generous if. The room is shared, of course, with 2 other students. One's still snoring, curled up like a shrimp near the wall, and the other's already up, muttering Latin conjugations while trying to yank on a boot that froze stiff in the night. There's no coffee to jolt you awake, no tea, just the bell. And maybe some bread if you're fast enough to reach the common table before the seniors eat it all. This is Paris in the 13th century, or maybe Oxford, or Bologna. It doesn't matter. The experience is roughly the same across Europe's early universities, miserable. These aren't institutions with ivy-covered facades and polished halls. These are loose, sometimes chaotic gatherings of students and teachers, more like academic squats than proper schools. Historians still argue whether they developed from cathedral schools or guild-style organizations. But one thing's certain: the idea of a centralized campus with amenities. That's adorable. So you step into the street. Not a quad. A literal, muddy street. It squelches beneath your boots as you join a stream of other equally frozen, equally grumpy students heading toward morning prayers. And by prayers, we mean a mandatory chapel service conducted entirely in Latin. Don't understand it. Too bad. This is spiritual nourishment and academic obligation rolled into one. Think of it as attendance and extra credit, but holier. The chapel is drafty. The stone pews slick with condensation. You kneel. You mumble along. You try not to nod off, but your head keeps jerking sideways, and your knees ache on the cold floor. Someone sneezes. Loudly. Everyone turns. And yes, you are all thinking the same thing. Please don't be the plague. But it's probably just dust or despair. After the prayers comes lecture. You walk with the herd toward the lecture hall, which is either an actual building, if you're in one of the fancier cities, or a rented room above a shop, or if it's a poor day, a cold field under gray skies. Your professor wears a heavy robe that trails through the muck. He has a voice like a saw on marble, and when he starts reading from a book of Aristotle in Latin, without explanation, commentary, or pause, you wonder briefly if your soul has just left your body. But no, you're still here, still cold, still extremely awake, yet somehow dreaming of breakfast. Here's the thing. There are no printed handouts, no PowerPoint slides. Printing presses won't be invented for another 2 centuries. Books are written by hand, slowly, painfully, often, with errors, and they're chained to desks so nobody runs off with them. The university owns maybe 3 copies of anything important. If you want notes, you write them yourself. Fast, with a quill. On parchment you had to buy, which might have cost more than a pair of shoes. Spoiler, you don't have great shoes. As the professor drones on, your hand cramps. Your eyes burn. You're pretty sure you copied a sentence twice, or maybe 3 times. The ink blots. You smear it, trying to fix it, which just makes your page look like a Rorschach test designed by someone in full medieval burnout. Your stomach growls. You're allowed 1 meal before sundown, and it's still hours away. You think back to the bit of dry bread you pocketed from yesterday. Maybe it's in your satchel, tucked next to your borrowed quill and half a candle stub. You hope it hasn't molded yet. Oh, and did we mention your university isn't even officially funded? In many cases, these early institutions are little more than student cooperatives. Some are recognized by the Pope. Others are chartered by kings. Some are entirely unofficial, just students banding together to hire a teacher and splitting his fee, like roommates ordering cheap takeout. There's no set curriculum either. You study what the teacher knows and what the town can tolerate. Theology is huge because salvation, obviously, but logic, law, and medicine are rising stars. History, not really a thing yet. Science, wrapped up in astrology and Galenic humors. Music? Only if you mean Gregorian chant, and maybe a hurdy-gurdy played badly under your window at 2 a.m. by that one guy who thinks he's romantic. By the time your first lecture ends, your nose is running, your fingers are stained with ink, and your soul is somewhere between the Book of Psalms and a really good nap. But no nap time isn't real. It's time to shuffle back outside, blink into the pale daylight, and trudge off to the next ordeal. Still, you made it through your first class. You're technically now a scholar, a deeply uncomfortable, underfed, sleepless scholar who may or may not develop scurvy. Welcome to the university. You slump onto a wooden bench that wobbles under your weight. The next lecture hasn't even started, and already you're mentally bracing for the linguistic gauntlet ahead. Because here's the deal. If you don't know Latin, you might as well be listening to whale song. In fact, whale song might be more comprehensible. Latin isn't just for the classroom. It's the entire language of university life. You speak it, write it, argue in it, dream in it, and possibly cry in it. Every announcement is made in Latin. The notes you copy Latin. The textbook you wish you had but can't afford, also Latin. Even your arguments with the professor over whether you deserve a passing mark must happen en latine. And no, there's no intro to Latin class to ease you in. You're expected to show up already fluent or fake it convincingly until you are. You shift awkwardly on the bench as the master walks in. He's draped in academic robes that drag dust and possibly the dreams of past students across the floor. His hairline has lost the battle and retreated somewhere behind his head. Without preamble, he opens his mouth and begins reading aloud some passage from Aristotle's De Anima, at a pace that suggests he has somewhere better to be. There is no explanation, no pause for questions. Just the relentless drone of Latin syllables bouncing off stone walls. Your mind drifts. You imagine him doing the same lecture at dinner. Eyes glazed wife, pouring soup, while he drones about intellectus possibilis. You stifle a laugh and quickly fake a cough, but a student near you glances over with a smirk. You're not alone in your suffering. Learning in this environment is like drinking from a fire hose while someone slaps you with a grammar book. And if you're not noble-born, this is extra brutal. Nobles have private tutors who prepped them since age 6. You're probably the kid of a merchant or minor cleric, shoved into this world with the faint hope that a degree might one day get you a job copying manuscripts for some bishop who forgets your name weekly. To survive, you memorize everything, like everything. You develop tricks, rhymes, acronyms, whispering to yourself in corners like a mad monk. If you're really desperate, you might pay a senior student to explain a difficult passage. These explanations may or may not be correct. Accuracy takes a back seat to survival. And here's the quirky bit: not all Latin is created equal. Students speak a kind of slangy, cut-up student Latin, much like modern teens invent shorthand. There's even a term for it, dog Latin. It's full of hybrid phrases, mangled conjugations, and totally made-up words. Think LOL meets Cicero. You and your roommates might whisper, "Mea culpa, dude, non potui legere heri," which loosely translates to, "My bad, bro, I didn't read yesterday." Historians still argue whether this fractured student Latin helped or hindered scholarly development. Some say it encouraged creativity and regional flair. Others argue it corrupted classical texts faster than rats in a granary. Either way, Latin becomes both your prison and your passport. You'll need it to read anything, to write anything, and most importantly, to pass anything. Exams, Latin. Disputations, Latin. Your eventual degree, should you survive that long, written in, you guessed it, Latin. But don't worry, you don't have to be a poet. Unless you want to impress someone or join a group of students who sit under trees writing love sonnets about a girl named Agnes who doesn't know they exist. These students are both annoying and everywhere. After class, you stagger outside for a breath of air. Your ears are ringing, your head's full of syntax, and your stomach is dangerously hollow. A group of students pass you by, arguing heatedly about the soul's immortality, flinging Latin back and forth like snowballs. You catch only fragments, substantia, incorporea, ergo immortalis. They're either about to publish a theological treatise or start a fist fight. Possibly both. You wander toward the market square, hoping to scrounge up a crust of bread or a hot turnip, which is somehow a thing. On the way, you overhear a few students heckling each other with delightfully obscure insults in Latin. One calls the other a porcus sapientiae, a pig of wisdom, which honestly might be your new nickname. Another yells caput tuum est in nous, your head is in a nutshell. Bilingual burns are all the rage. By afternoon, your brain is pudding. But there's still one more hurdle: your disputation group. This isn't a class, it's a battlefield. You and a handful of other students gather in a dusty room, candles flickering, a moderator presiding. Usually a sleep-deprived student 1 year ahead of you, and begin to debate some ancient point of doctrine, in Latin, naturally. The prompt today, whether divine illumination is necessary for all human knowledge, which basically means, can you know anything at all without God helping you think? Within minutes, voices rise, quills wave. Someone quotes Augustine, someone else misquotes him, someone else insults their opponent's parentage. using a passage from Boethius. You say something hesitantly. The moderator raises an eyebrow. Impropria declinatio, he mutters. Bad declension. Translation, you used the wrong ending on your noun. Everyone groans. You want to sink into the floor and let the worms correct your Latin. Still, you're learning. Slowly, painfully, you begin to follow the rhythms. You start recognizing the openings of famous arguments the way theologians like to structure a point in 3 parts prima, secunda, tertia. You find yourself thinking in strange terms. You begin to internalize the rules of rhetoric, of syllogism, of scholastic back and forth. You don't understand it all, but something's cracking open in your mind. Back in your dorm, your roommate is humming a chant under his breath, translating it line by line. You join in. The two of you sit beside a candle and parse a sentence for 20 minutes. When you finally crack its meaning, it's not just understanding, it's victory. By now, the cold doesn't sting quite as sharply. You still can't feel your toes, but the words are beginning to stick. And sure, you haven't bathed in a week, and you may never again see what vegetables look like raw, but you translated a full page today. That's something. In time, Latin becomes more than a tool. It becomes your second skin. You dream in it. You mutter prayers in it. You even curse in it when the wind blows out your candle and ruins 3 hours of transcription. And if someone drops a line of Ovid at dinner, you don't just nod, you answer back. Your fingers are still cramped from the last lecture. And now it's time for your favorite part of the day, not using a textbook. Because you don't have one. Almost nobody does. Let's be real. A single book, just one, can cost more than a house, or a small vineyard, or a mildly used war horse with decent knees. And it's not like they're being mass-produced. No Gutenberg press, yet remember, it's all handwritten manuscripts lovingly and maddeningly copied by monks or underpaid scribes who occasionally get bored and doodle rabbits jousting with snails in the margins. Yes, that's a real thing. Historians still argue whether those marginalia were deep allegories or just medieval inside jokes. We lean toward jokes. You've seen those snails. So, if you want access to knowledge, you have to either beg, borrow, or painstakingly copy it yourself. That's right. Bring your own parchment. And bring a lot, because even a short text might take days or weeks to transcribe, word for word, by hand, in Latin, while trying not to spill candle wax or bleed ink all over it. You sit at a rough wooden table, in a borrowed study room more of a glorified broom closet than a proper library. The one well-off student in your class, the guy who smells suspiciously of cinnamon and always has clean fingernails, has somehow scored access to a full copy of De Civitate Dei. You edge closer, eyeing the pages like a starving raccoon watching someone unwrap a burrito. If you're lucky and very, very polite, he might let you look over his shoulder, but only if you don't breathe too hard on the vellum. One wrong smear and the entire page is ruined. You whisper your thanks and start copying. Quill in one hand, parchment in the other. You dip into a pot of homemade ink. It smells vaguely like soot and desperation. You begin scratching out the first line letter by letter. Your writing is slow, uneven, nervous. One slip of the hand, and the sentence looks like it was attacked by a drunken goose. No backspacing here. Mistakes are permanent, unless you scrape the ink off with a knife, which you've definitely tried, which has definitely led to holes in the page. Hours pass. Your lower back aches like you've been hit with a small mace. You shift and stretch only to hear a loud snap your quill has cracked. Panic. You rummage in your satchel for another one. Find a blunt nub that might work and keep going. The other student says nothing but casts a look that says, "Please stop breathing near my book." And here's the kicker. Not all parchment is created equal. The good stuff, thin, smooth, creamy, comes from young calfskin and costs a fortune. You're stuck with scraps, sometimes repurposed from old ledgers or rejected manuscripts. One of your pages clearly has a faded tax record ghosting underneath your fresh lines. You ignore it, or incorporate it into your notes. Maybe it's a metaphor. Scholars will puzzle over it centuries from now and think you were deep. But let's say you're feeling brave. You want to own a book, or at least part of one. Great. First, you need parchment, lots of it. One average-sized manuscript might require over 100 animal skins. That's right. A herd of sheep slaughtered for your midterm review packet. Quirky fact. Some students tried making their own ink using recipes passed down by friars. Mixtures of oak, gall iron salts, and whatever smelled least offensive. Then comes binding. Or rather not binding, unless you're fabulously wealthy. Most texts live loose-folded and tucked into leather satchels, or wrapped in spare cloth. Pages fall out. Ink fades. Fire and rain are your eternal enemies. So is your roommate, who once spilled stew across half a page of your notes on Aquinas. You haven't spoken since. Copying isn't just about preservation. It's part of how you learn. Writing something out forces you to read it, think about it, and absorb it. You even start noticing the rhythm of the text, the way medieval scholars loved to group arguments in neat triads as if heaven itself graded essays. It's weirdly soothing, until you sneeze and smear a line across 3 paragraphs. You sigh, grab a fresh scrap, and start again. Meanwhile, you hear stories, whispers in dark corners of the refectory about students who steal books. Blasphemous right. But yes, it happens. Someone breaks into a cathedral library and walks out with a copy of Isidore's Etymologies. A few pages at least. There are even rumors of underground student rings trading manuscript fragments like baseball cards. You haven't seen it, but you've looked, just in case. What's stranger is that your professors often don't have complete copies either. Many work from memory or carry notebooks filled with their own copied excerpts. If they need a passage they don't remember, they reconstruct it. This results in creative interpretations. Scholars today still debate how much of what was taught back then was accurate and how much was medieval academic improv. Eventually, your page is done. It's not pretty, but it's yours. You tuck it into your bundle with the reverence of someone placing a newborn in a crib made of burlap. It crinkles faintly. It smells like ink and sweat. You hope it dries evenly. You stretch your legs and walk toward the courtyard again. Courtyard is a generous term. It's more of a shared muddy patch, where students gather to recite or argue or take turns coughing dramatically while pretending to read aloud. As the sun dips lower, you hear a classmate chant lines from Boethius. Not because he's particularly devout, he's just trying to memorize it before tomorrow's disputation. You recognize the passage. You copied that one last week. You recite the next line under your breath, a little thrill lighting in your chest when you get it right. By now, you've collected maybe 20 full pages. You keep them rolled up in a leather belt pouch tied tight against the rain. When you pull them out, they rustle like dry leaves. You've stopped worrying about your penmanship, mostly. At least until your tutor scrawls a note on your margin. Melius scribe, aut nihil intelligam. Write better, or I won't understand any of this. So you practice, you learn, you copy, you survive. And once in a while, when the candle's burning low and your eyes blur from too much Aristotle, you add a little doodle in the margin, a dragon curled around a syllogism, maybe, or a tiny monk riding a fish, just because. Someday someone might find it and wonder what you were thinking. Let them wonder. You arrive late to your next lecture, not that the professor notices or cares. He's already deep into a tangent about the metaphysical properties of angels, muttering to himself and scratching at his beard like he's digging for buried thoughts. His robe is patched in places you'd rather not look at, and you're almost positive he hasn't blinked since you sat down. Welcome to the world of medieval professors, where brilliance, madness, and chronic sleep deprivation all share the same pulpit. At the university, your instructors are known as magistri or doctores, depending on their seniority and the specific field they've conquered. But behind those lofty titles are very human, often very odd individuals. Some are inspiring, some are terrifying, and some are just weird. Today's lecturer, for example, is Dr. Gerard. He's notorious not only for quoting entire pages of Aristotle from memory, but also for having once attempted to exorcise a headache with holy water during a lecture. He's a mix of genius and enigma, like if Sherlock Holmes had seasonal scurvy and too many opinions on Augustine. He finishes the passage on angels, then pauses, slowly turns to face the room. His eyes sweep over the crowd like he's either about to assign homework or cast a minor curse. Et quid est homo sine ration, he demands. What is man without reason? The room is silent. Then a brave student in the front row answers bestia, a beast. The professor nods once, then continues, as if nothing happened. No further explanation. Just on to the next point. You stare at your notes, which at this point resemble some lost dialect of Latin or the scribblings of a medieval squirrel with a theology fetish. You underline ratio 3 times and draw a tiny angry angel next to it, just to remember how it felt. Here's the funny thing, not all professors are official appointments. Some are simply older students with enough knowledge or confidence to charge others for lessons. Others are local clergy moonlighting as academics. And then there are the wandering scholars, charismatic, controversial, sometimes banned in 2 cities for starting intellectual riots. These lectors vagantes have no fixed address, no official title, and often questionable hygiene. But their lectures are packed. In fact, some of the most influential medieval professors were deeply eccentric. There's a story about one who taught with a live ferret in his sleeve for warmth and moral vigilance. Another was said to quote Plato while juggling apples. Historians still argue whether this was a teaching method or just a really weird personality quirk. Some professors are steeped in theology, others in law or logic. Theologians are the rock stars often walking a tightrope between orthodoxy and heresy. One bold comment too far, and the church might step in with more than just a wagging finger. You remember the tale of Peter Abelard, famed for his brilliance, infamous for his scandalous affair, and ultimately castrated by hired thugs. University gossip, sure, but it's also in the textbooks now. Your own professor isn't quite that dramatic, but he does keep a small jar of what he calls concentrated thought on his desk. Nobody knows what's inside. He claims it's a blend of herbs and divine inspiration. One time, a student dared to sniff it. They sneezed violently and weren't seen for 3 days. When they returned, they'd switched faculties from logic to music. Later that afternoon, you attend a disputation overseen by another professor, Master Alain, who has a very different style. He's calm, measured, fond of quoting Cicero like it's a bedtime story. But he also corrects pronunciation mid-sentence, and once made a student redo an argument because their logic offended him emotionally. His feedback is cutting yet poetic. Your reasoning is like wet bread, son, technically edible, but deeply disappointing. Still, Alain's students revere him. He's known to loan out books from his personal collection, chained, of course, to prevent accidents, and he occasionally hosts informal tutorials over weak wine and barley biscuits. These rare moments of mentorship are golden, even if the biscuits could double as blunt weapons. The thing is, you never really know your professors. Their personal lives are closed off. Some are celibate. Some are widowers. Some are so single-minded that they probably don't notice their own birthdays. And a few dabble in the mystical. You once overheard a rumor that Dr. Gerard secretly studies alchemy, that he tried to transmute copper into gold using chicken bones and excerpts from Augustine, that his beard is longer on one side because of philosophical magnetism. You laugh it off, but part of you wonders. There's always that lingering smell of sulfur near his desk. Of course, not all professors are tolerated by the community. Some are expelled for teaching forbidden texts works by Averroes or other Islamic philosophers, who offered brilliant but theologically awkward interpretations of Aristotle. Others face backlash for their political views or personal conduct. There's an ongoing dispute right now over whether one professor actually exists. No one's seen him in weeks, but his lectures are still being posted on the university bulletin wall. A prank or a ghost? You don't ask. You try to avoid the more combative lecturers, the ones who like to shame students in public, throwing questions like darts and smirking at every missed answer. They tend to teach logic and believe sarcasm is a pedagogical tool. One in particular enjoys asking riddles with no real answer, then declaring that you have proven the limits of human reason by failing to respond. Thanks, I guess. By twilight, your brain is overloaded. You walk past a group of students gathered around a professor who's sketching something on the ground with a stick. It's a complicated diagram of the heavens' concentric circles for the planets, with a ring of fire separating Earth from the divine spheres. He's talking about how music reflects the cosmic harmony of the universe. A few students nod like they understand. Most just look enchanted by the professor's enthusiasm. You linger for a moment. There's something oddly beautiful about the way his voice blends with the dusk. Later, you return to your dorm where your roommate is attempting to decipher the notes he took in today's class. You compare scribbles. His are worse, much worse. You both laugh. You think Master Alain is human, he asks. You pause. I think he eats disappointment for breakfast. Your roommate nods solemnly. Professors shape your world here, not just the knowledge, but the atmosphere. Their quirks become inside jokes. Their phrases sneak into your speech. Their logic starts to rewire your thoughts. You imitate them, fear them, and once in a while even admire them. They are the guardians of knowledge in a world that still half believes in dragons and bloodletting. And somehow, despite everything, the damp halls, the bad food, the constant exhaustion, they keep teaching. Maybe they don't sleep either. You wake up hungry. Not, I could use a snack hungry. More like I would cheerfully gnaw on this wooden spoon hungry. Your stomach makes a noise that sounds like theological disagreement. And unfortunately, today's breakfast looks about as encouraging as your roommate's attempts to explain the Trinity using turnips. There's no coffee, of course. That miracle bean won't reach Europe until centuries from now, and even then, it'll be considered suspiciously exotic. Right now, the hot beverage of choice ale. Yes, you're technically drinking beer with breakfast. Not because you're living wild, but because it's often safer than water. Not strong beer, mind you small ale, a low-alcohol brew that's basically yeasty dishwater with aspirations. But it's warm, and it doesn't make you ill, usually. So you start your morning with a hunk of stale bread, a smear of questionable cheese, and a mug of warm ale. That's it. That's the energy source for your 12-hour day of Latin lectures, logical disputations, and awkwardly public theological wrestling matches. No granola, no eggs, no latte with oat milk. Just fermented barley sadness. Lunch, if you can call it that, isn't much better. You shuffle to the refectory with the rest of the student herd elbows out, hoping there's something left by the time you reach the front. The stew smells faintly of cabbage and mystery. Inside, you find 2 unidentifiable roots, a tiny scrap of meat maybe, and enough salt to preserve a ship's worth of cod. You scoop it up with bread. No utensils, just hands and hope. The bread, by the way, could double as a roofing tile. It's coarse, made from barley or rye or whatever grain was cheapest and most dentally aggressive that season. If you're lucky, there's a bit of bacon in the pot. If you're really lucky, no one else noticed it before you. You sit on a bench next to a senior student who chews with such intensity, you begin to question whether he's trying to eat the spoon he doesn't have. You ask him what the meat might be. He shrugs and says, might have been pigeon, might have been rat. Hard to tell once it's boiled for 2 hours. You quietly push the meat to the side. Here's the historical fun fact: medieval students ate differently depending on where they studied. In Paris, food was marginally better thanks to wealthier patrons and ecclesiastical connections. In Bologna, pasta made a rare but glorious appearance. In Oxford, you guessed it, root vegetables and despair. The lack of coffee isn't just inconvenient, it's a major academic handicap. You try staying alert during a 2-hour lecture on predestination fueled only by barley porridge and warm ale. Your eyelids turn into bricks. Your mind drifts. You begin to genuinely wonder if purgatory is just one endless lecture without caffeine. So how did students stay awake? The answer is poorly. Some chewed herbs. Mint or rosemary were believed to stimulate the humors and sharpen the mind. Others tried splashing cold water on their faces between sessions. A few bold souls allegedly carried small thorns to jab into their legs when their heads started to bob. Historians still debate whether these methods were widespread, or just the antics of particularly desperate overachievers. There are apothecaries, of course, tiny shops in town that sell dried plants, dubious powders, and tonics that smell like regret. You once bought a little pouch of powdered mandrake root. The apothecary claimed it would lift the fog of study. You sprinkled it into your evening stew and immediately hallucinated that your roommate was a goat reciting Virgil. You've stuck to rosemary ever since. Meals aren't just sustenance. They're also one of the few social times you get. Students gossip between bites. They trade exam tips, argue theology, or recite bad Latin poems about their tutors. There's always that one student who tries to impress everyone with a riddle. What is the one thing that grows less the more you take from it? Silence. A hole. Groans all around. Someone usually plays a reed flute badly in the background until another student throws a crust at him. And then there's the dining etiquette. It's more about not offending the wrong person than using the right spoon. You don't speak with your mouth full, not just because it's rude, but because you might choke and die. and that would definitely disrupt the flow of lunch. You offer the last piece of bread to the oldest student present, even if they always say no and then take it anyway. And, above all, you don't insult the cook, ever. Not unless you want to find yourself mysteriously assigned to latrine duty for a week. Dinner, such as it is, arrives around dusk. It's usually whatever didn't get eaten at lunch, plus more bread, and possibly a bowl of pottage, a thick grain stew with the consistency of old cement and the flavor profile of just edible. Once a week, maybe on Sunday, you get fish, unless you're in a meat-allowed period, in which case you get more stew. You've learned not to ask what's in it. Quirky tidbit. Some student colleges had specific dietary codes. At certain monasteries turned student residences, meat was forbidden entirely. At others, you could only eat in silence while a senior read aloud from Scripture or the works of Augustine. There's nothing quite like trying to choke down boiled leeks while someone solemnly recites a passage about eternal damnation. You finish your meal and stretch your legs. You're not full, not really, but you're not starving either. That counts as a success. You pass a group of students on your way out, one's holding a jug of stronger ale and grinning like he's discovered Aristotle's lost jokes. He offers you a swig. You hesitate. It's not exactly encouraged, but what else are you going to do? The ale is bitter sharp, slightly sour. You cough, but it warms your chest. Another student offers you a bite of honeyed fig someone's birthday, apparently. For a brief moment, your taste buds remember what joy is. Then it's gone. Back in the dorm, your roommate is gnawing on a chunk of salted fish. Want some? He asks. Tastes like sadness, but it's chewy. You decline. And here's the thing, no one eats well here. Even the rich students complain. Food is simple, repetitive, sometimes suspicious, and almost always lukewarm. But it fuels your days, however barely. It gets you through lectures and long nights of candlelit copying. You start to appreciate tiny luxuries, a ripe pear, a spoonful of honey, a pinch of imported spice someone smuggled from their uncle's merchant trunk. You learn to ration, to share, to look forward to fasting days only because they offer a break in the monotony. And as you fall asleep, stomach vaguely settled candle, guttering out, you dream of a future invention that will one day change academia forever. It's hot. It's dark. It's full of promise. You don't know its name yet, but one day someone will call it coffee. You're trying to sleep. You really are. But your roommate is tuning his lute again, badly, for the third time tonight. The strings squeal in protest. He winces, mutters something in butchered Latin, and tries again. This one's supposed to be a love song, something about the Virgin Mary, and a metaphor involving bees. It's not working. You groan and roll over in your straw-filled sack, which rustles like dry hay in a barn full of grumpy monks. This is dorm life in the medieval university. Cramped, chaotic, and profoundly unprivate. Forget solo study spaces or ensuite bathrooms. You're sharing your living quarters with at least one other student. Probably 2 or 3. If the university is underfunded, which it is, you sleep shoulder to shoulder. Your straw mats separated only by ambition, body odor, and the faint hope that someone remembered to hang garlic on the windowsill to keep out the damp spirits. There's no heating system, just the hope that body warmth and heavy woolen blankets will fight off the night air. Spoiler, they don't. The walls are stone. The windows are slatted wood or nothing. and the wind whistles in with all the subtlety of a Gregorian death metal chorus. You're cold, always cold. You've started sleeping in layers, wrapping your feet in rags like a peasant preparing for war. And of course, there are lice. There are always lice. You scratch your scalp absent-mindedly, hoping no one notices. But they notice because they're scratching too. You've all given up pretending. It's part of the aesthetic now. A shared experience. A badge of scholarly suffering. There's a medieval saying that goes, "Scholaris pauper sed sapiens," the student is poor but wise. They forget to mention he's also itchy, cranky, and being kept awake by a roommate trying to woo someone he's never spoken to, with an off-key ballad about divine honey. You sit up. Can you not? Your roommate looks offended. It's dedicated. It's painful, you reply. Another roommate snores loudly from the other side of the room. You toss a boot in his general direction. It lands with a dull thud followed by a muffled "quis fecit hoc?" Who did that? Silence returns, sort of. You shift beneath your blanket, trying to find the least lumpy section of straw, and stare at the ceiling, which is just shadow and splinters. In the morning, you'll have to deal with the real consequences of living communally. Clothes gone missing. Ink mysteriously shared without permission. That one guy who borrows your candle stub without asking, every single time. Here's a fringe fact. Some student accommodations had rules banning the playing of musical instruments after sunset. Not because of any official bedtime policy, but because too many lute-related brawls broke out in the middle of the night. It turns out nothing frays nerves like being forced to hear a 3-chord love song after a full day of theological speculation and cabbage stew. But back to your dorm. It's not just the roommates. It's the smell. The very specific aroma of unwashed wool, sweat, smoke, ink, and despair. You open a shutter for a bit of fresh air. Bad idea. The cold punches you in the face like a righteous archangel. You shut it again. Your roommates have names, of course. Thomas, the lute guy who dreams of becoming a court poet, or possibly seducing a noblewoman with verses about bees. Then there's Martin, who says he's studying law, but mostly just naps in his robe and eats candied figs when he thinks no one's looking. You're not sure how he keeps getting figs. Living this close means you learn things you didn't want to. Thomas talks in his sleep, usually in Latin. Sometimes he debates imaginary professors about the nature of divine grace. Other times he just mutters "malapoma, bad apples" over and over, which is either a metaphor or a confession. Martin snores like a dying ox and sometimes wakes himself up with his own hiccups. One time you found him reading while hanging upside down off the bed. He claimed it improved blood flow and inspired clarity. He also fainted. Clarity is relative. You all argue over ridiculous things. Who left crumbs in the ink pot? Who used the last of the lamp oil and didn't refill it? Who borrowed whose robe and returned it smelling like fish? But you also reluctantly become a kind of family. The poor, perpetually tired, passive-aggressive kind. One night, when the wind is howling hard enough to shake the shutters loose, you all huddle around a single candle trying to finish notes from the day's lecture. You share parchment. You argue over a particularly dense passage from Aquinas. You tease Thomas about his bee metaphors. You laugh, and it echoes warmly through the icy room. Historians still argue whether these communal living situations were more efficient or just unavoidable. Some say it built resilience. Others say it bred lice and resentment in equal measure. Either way, this is how students lived. Close, uncomfortable, interdependent. In some of the wealthier colleges, Students had assigned beds formal curfews and designated responsibilities like sweeping or water fetching. In poorer setups, it was more of a survival of the least filthy scenario. You might take turns fetching water from the communal well cold heavy work, or gathering firewood which the university may or may not reimburse. Quirky side note: a few student quarters enforce silence periods after compline the final prayer of the day. You were expected to communicate only by gestures. Thomas once tried to mime Pass the Ink and accidentally started a 10-minute game of interpretive theology charades. Even hygiene is communal. You share basins, towels, occasionally bathwater, though that's frowned upon unless you're desperate or unbothered by floating lint. Full-body baths are rare, often reserved for holidays or major liturgical events. When you do get a chance to bathe properly, it feels like being reborn with fewer angels. By candlelight, you patch your sock with borrowed thread. You ink a few lines of commentary onto your page. You fight off sleep with little success. You can hear Martin snoring again, and Thomas muttering something about honey. And slowly, despite the noise, despite the cold, despite the poking straw and mysterious foot pressed against yours, under the blanket you drift off. The sounds of the day fade. Even the lute is quiet now mercifully. You dream of a room to yourself, a warm one, with books and silence. Unimaginable luxury. You're sweating, not from exertion, just pure, uncut panic. Today is exam day. There's no neat paper to fill in, no multiple choice, no helpful prompts like explain in your own words. No, this is medieval academia, where tests don't come with erasers. They come with witnesses' oral defense, and the possibility of complete and public intellectual collapse. Welcome to the disputatio, where your memory, logic, Latin, and very soul are on trial. You've been preparing for weeks, maybe months. You've copied the texts, memorized the commentaries, rewritten entire theological treatises just to make sure you understand the phrasing. You've practiced debating with your roommates, one of whom fell asleep mid-argument and still won. You even tried fasting the day before. Some say it sharpens the mind. Mostly, it just made your stomach sound like a demon trying to escape during morning prayer. And now you are seated on a simple bench in front of the master. There's no desk, no privacy. You are literally on display like an undercooked pie at a market stall. A group of fellow students watches from the side. Some look sympathetic. Some look excited. One guy is openly praying for your failure, so he'll look smarter by comparison. Your examiner clears his throat. He's been teaching longer than you've been alive. He probably still owns a pair of boots made from the skins of students who failed their final argument. He begins, slowly, carefully. Disputamus. Let us discuss, he says, and Deus est probari possit ratione sola. Can the existence of God be proven by reason alone? You swallow. Hard. Now you have to speak out loud in Latin with confidence. You must begin with the proper salutation, the correct structure, and a tone that says, yes, I read Aquinas without crying. You start talking. You don't recognize your own voice. It's higher than usual, slightly trembly. You launch into a summary of the 5 ways. You reference motion, causality, necessity. Your hands twitch like you're conducting a very nervous orchestra. Halfway through, you realize you've repeated a sentence. Twice. You plow forward anyway. Better to be redundant than silent. Silence is death. The examiner nods slowly. He raises a hand. Now comes the objection. He challenges your second point. He says, It's too reliant on empirical observation. He quotes Boethius. He smirks. Your gut twists. You reply. You cite Augustine. You counter with the notion that empirical knowledge is not divorced from divine illumination. You add a flourish, a joke, a Latin pun. No one laughs, possibly because it wasn't funny, possibly because they didn't get it, possibly because it's 8 a.m. and everyone's hungry. The exchange continues, back and forth. Question, response, rebuttal. Your palms sweat. Your robe sticks to your back. Your brain races. You suddenly forget the word for essence. You freeze. Your mouth opens. Nothing comes out. The examiner stares. You mumble something about quidditas, a decent backup term. He raises an eyebrow. You think you've covered it. Maybe, after what feels like an eternity, the questions stop. The master leans back. He folds his hands. You're not sure if he's meditating or just preparing to pronounce judgment. He finally says, non-male. Not bad. You nearly faint with relief. This was just a minor examination. A warm-up. The real horror comes later, the determination or licentiate disputation, essentially your final exam if you survive that long. These can last hours, days even, in front of a panel, sometimes in a church, with members of the faculty and occasionally visiting nobles watching. There are stories, of course. Students who fainted mid-argument and had to be revived with wine and salted pork. Others who ran from the hall never to be seen again. One poor soul threw up on his own thesis. That's not metaphor. That's history. Historians still argue whether these exams were fair measures of scholarship or just academic endurance tests designed to weed out the physically weak. Either way, they were brutal. Your worth wasn't measured in essays or page counts. It was tested in real time under pressure, in full view of your peers and superiors. And it wasn't just theology students who suffered. Law, medicine, and philosophy candidates all faced similar trials. In some cases, students had to defend positions they disagreed with purely to demonstrate rhetorical skill. Imagine passionately arguing that dreams are sent by demons, while secretly dreaming of a job that pays in more than barley stew. But here's the truly weird part. There were rules for how you could argue. You couldn't raise your voice too much. You couldn't insult the examiner. You had to stick to structured logic. If A, then B, therefore C. No emotional appeals. No storytelling. No analogies involving vegetables, no matter how desperate you got. The debates could get philosophical, abstract, and absolutely bonkers. Can God make a stone so heavy even he can't lift it? Is time a created thing or an eternal constant? Are angels capable of changing their minds mid-flight? These were not jokes. These were real exam questions. And you were expected to have answers. Sometimes, professors turned these events into performances, staging disputes as public events where students debated in front of crowds for sport. Like gladiators, but with syllogisms. Winners earned prestige. Losers earned, well, mostly humiliation and extra study time. But there was camaraderie, too. After a particularly vicious examination, your roommates might pat you on the back, hand you some pilfered figs, and declare you lived. You win. There might even be singing. Awful singing, but heartfelt. And some students, madmen, obviously liked disputations. They thrived on the adrenaline. They memorized counter-arguments in their sleep. They collected obscure references like trophies. They considered heated logic exchanges to be refreshing. You mostly just consider them dangerous. When your own exam finally ends, you stagger outside like you've escaped a burning building. The sky seems brighter. Your lungs work again. Your legs are jelly, but at least they still function. You meet your roommates near the refectory. They're waiting with a half-stale loaf and a cup of ale. "Did you cry?" one asks. You shake your head. "Almost. Good enough," the other says. You're a scholar now. That night you lie awake staring at the ceiling. Not from nerves, those are gone. Just from sheer disbelief that it's over. Until the next one. You wake up with a sharp kick to the foot. Not metaphorical. A real physical kick. Courtesy of the university beadle who doubles as the dorm inspector punishment enforcer and general bringer of misery. He holds a lantern in one hand and a scowl in the other. You there. To the hall he grunts. You groan. You're not even fully conscious, but you already know what this is about. Last night's little escapade. The tavern. The song. The dare involving the bishop's cat and a stolen roll of parchment. You hadn't even meant to join. Really, you just followed your roommate Thomas for a quick stroll, which turned into an impromptu poetry contest over beer, which somehow became a group effort to rewrite Psalm 23 as a love letter to cheese. And now, here you are, dragged from bed, bleary-eyed, and wearing one sock on your way to face the university authorities. At medieval universities, discipline isn't taken lightly. The institution sees itself as a moral guide, not just a center for learning. You don't just get detention, you get public humiliation, theological guilt-tripping, and possibly a permanent nickname. You're led through the muddy lanes of the university quarter, past the stables and the kitchens, to the aula communis, the great hall. Inside, a few students already wait, fidgeting nervously. One is still hiccuping from last night's ale. Another is trying to look innocent, despite a suspicious ink stain across his robe that reads, "Down," with syllogism. At the far end of the room sits the proctor. He's got a beard like tangled rope and a face carved from judgment. Next to him is a clerk furiously scribbling in the discipline register a book nearly as thick as a theology text and twice as disapproving. Your name is called. You step forward. And now the charge is unlicensed wandering, improper behavior in a public house, blasphemous misquotation of scripture in verse. You want to protest. You want to explain that technically it wasn't your idea, and also the cheese metaphor was honestly quite elegant. But it doesn't matter. You're already guilty by association. The punishment, public penance. You'll be spending the afternoon standing outside the university gates, wearing a sign that says Stultus in carmine, a fool in verse. Oh, and you have to recite a passage from the Psalms every time someone walks past. That's not a joke. Public shame is a key element of medieval academic justice. You don't get suspended, you get displayed. Warnings are public. Penalties are theatrical. Humiliation is the lesson. And honestly, you're getting off easy. Other common punishments include wearing a donkey ear cap during lectures, scrubbing the refectory floors with a wooden toothbrush, standing silent during meals for a full week while everyone else talks around you, copying the university's behavioral code by hand 3 times, or, if things get really serious, exclusion from Mass, which is spiritual doom, academic death, and social exile all rolled into one. There's even a tale of a student at Bologna who was caught stealing another's parchment. His punishment: sitting at the front of the class wearing a wooden chain and being required to compliment every classmate as they walked in. Historians still argue whether this was a formal sentence or the work of a particularly creative professor of rhetoric. You shuffle into place outside the gate. The wind is sharp today. The sign around your neck itches. You hold a small parchment scroll with your assigned psalm. Each time a professor walks by, you recite it badly. One of them laughs. Another shakes his head. A few students smirk in solidarity. But some do stop. One even claps you on the shoulder and says, "I did the same last year. Only my sign said, Neglector Sapientia." Miss Beller of Wisdom. That helps. A little. Eventually, the beetle returns and releases you from your post. You trudge back to the dorm sign, folded awkwardly under your arm, and throw yourself onto your straw mat. Your roommate is there looking sheepish. "Sorry," Thomas mutters. "I didn't think they'd actually—" "It's fine," you reply. Because here's the truth. Everyone ends up punished at some point. It's a rite of passage. Some offenses are serious, actual crimes like fighting theft or heretical speech. Others are minor, being loud after compline, skipping mass, or inventing saucy rhymes about your tutor. There's a whole bureaucracy of medieval student justice. Depending on the university discipline, might be handled by a dean, a proctor, or a rotating council of senior scholars. Some offenses are judged by the church. Others fall under town jurisdiction, which leads to frequent turf wars. Students often claimed benefit of clergy trying to dodge town courts in favor of more lenient university discipline, not always successfully. You sit up and eye the parchment on your desk. You still have tomorrow's notes to finish copying. Your ink has dried. Your hands are sore. But your name's not in the register for heresy, at least. You joke with your roommates that you should hang the sign on the wall, a trophy. Thomas insists it would add character to the room. Martin suggests drawing a cartoon of you underneath it, looking thoughtful and repentant, perhaps with a halo. You all laugh, which feels good, even if your pride still stings. As night falls, you hear another student being hauled past the window loudly, protesting that he only threw the fig because it slipped. The beetle disagrees. Some students lean into the role of mischief maker. They wear their punishments like badges. Others reform temporarily, vowing to stay quiet, study hard, and avoid further disgrace. You're somewhere in the middle. And maybe that's the point. The medieval university isn't just about learning facts or copying books. It's about testing limits. You're not just earning a degree, you're being shaped. By the cold, by the lectures, by the punishments. Even by the psalms you had to recite in the wind while wearing a deeply itchy sign. Discipline here isn't designed to ruin you. It's designed to remind you you're part of something older, stranger, and more demanding than any tavern brawl or midnight dare. And maybe, just maybe, you'll think twice before quoting the book of Job in a love poem next time. You wake up with your tongue glued to the roof of your mouth, your head pounding like you've been smacked with a reliquary, and your stomach making quiet, ominous threats. Ah, yes, the medieval hangover. You vaguely remember last night. A few tankards of ale at the tavern down the lane. A drinking song that devolved into Gregorian karaoke. Someone challenged you to a theological limerick contest. You lost, but only because you rhymed salvation with fermentation. Points for creativity, not orthodoxy. Now you're paying the price. And here's the kicker, there's no coffee, no greasy breakfast, no ibuprofen. Just medieval science, which unfortunately believes your current condition is due to an imbalance of humors. Your bile is up, your phlegm is down, your black bile is sulking somewhere in the spleen corner, and blood, as always, is misbehaving. The cure? Well, that depends on who you ask. If you ask the apothecary down the street, he'll hand you a wax-stoppered bottle of something thick and green. You don't ask too many questions. It smells like mint vinegar and punishment. You drink it anyway. 5 minutes later, you are extremely aware of your internal organs. If you ask the university's medicus or medical scholar, he might prescribe a cold bath followed by a long walk and an hour of silent prayer. You try it. The bath nearly kills you. The walk nearly finishes the job. The prayer just makes your headache more dramatic. Others recommend fasting. Let the stomach purge itself through penance. One friend insists garlic and raw onions will sweat the sin out. Another student swears by chewing rosemary and muttering fragments of Virgil. That one might just be a dare. The strangest remedy leeching. Yes, actual leeches. A student in the philosophy faculty insists it helped him think more clearly. Historians still argue whether he was being sarcastic or just dangerously committed to humoral theory. You slump in the corner of the dorm, trying to will the walls to stop moving. Your roommate, Thomas, hands you a chunk of stale bread. Absorbent, he says seriously. Soaks up the bile. You chew mechanically. It helps. Barely. There's no real time to be hungover, of course. Lectures continue. Attendance is expected. You wrap yourself in your scratchiest cloak to keep from falling asleep and drag yourself through the slush to morning prayers. Every bell toll feels like a personal insult. The Latin chant echoes like it's being shouted inside your skull. You're not alone. Several students around you are glassy-eyed, swaying slightly, and reciting the Psalms half a beat behind. You exchange the universal look of academic regret. Later at lecture, the professor notices. He raises an eyebrow. Vinolenti scholari non sapiunt, he says. Drunken students learn nothing. He's not wrong. Drinking is technically allowed within reason. After all, water is often unsafe and small ale is part of daily life. But drunkenness, that's a sin. And sin brings consequences, especially in a university where theology is both a subject and a lifestyle. Public drunkenness can get you fined. Repeated offenses might land you another stint in penance, maybe even a formal confession in the cathedral watched by your peers while you promise to never again insult St. Jerome's commentary on the epistles while sloshed. Quirky fact, one college in England briefly banned apples because too many students were fermenting them into bootleg cider. The ban didn't last. Students just got sneakier. Of course, there's a double standard. Professors drink too. Some even show up to lectures inspired. There's a long-standing joke that certain theologians only found the Holy Spirit after 3 goblets of red wine. You're not saying your logic teacher slurs his syllogisms after sunset, but you've seen him nod off mid-lecture with a smile. Still, there's a reason L features so heavily in student songs. You recite one now under your breath as you copy notes with trembling hands. In vino veritas and aqua suspicium, in wine truth, in water sighing. It's catchy, sad, accurate. You shuffle to the refectory at midday, hoping food will reset your entire existence. Today's offering, pottage, hard bread, and what might be dried peas. You chew slowly. Every bite feels like a negotiation with your stomach. Still, by the end of the bowl, the pounding in your head has softened into a dull, manageable throb. Thomas joins you carrying a jug of ale. You raise an eyebrow. Hair of the dog, he says. You pass. One student across the table leans in. My uncle's a physician. He says the best cure is thinking sober thoughts while staring at candlelight. You blink. How's that working for you? He shrugs. I've only thrown up twice today. At least there's some comfort in shared misery. The university doesn't have wellness services. There's no medieval yoga, no grain bowls. Your only support systems are your fellow students who cycle through celebration recovery, guilt, and academic panic like a monastic calendar. But occasionally, someone shows kindness. A senior hands you a piece of ginger root. Chew this, he says. It won't fix anything, but it'll distract you from how awful you feel. It burns your tongue and clears your sinuses instantly. You nod in thanks, eyes watering. Back in the dorm, you lie down with a damp cloth over your eyes. Outside, someone starts playing a flute. You consider yelling, but instead you groan softly and accept your fate. It's not the first hangover. It won't be the last. Because as much as students study theology, logic, and the natural sciences, they also study celebration. Celebration after a successful disputation. Celebration after surviving a plague scare. Celebration after not falling asleep during Master Alain's 6-hour lecture on divine simplicity. And every celebration comes with a price. Your body is the receipt. By evening, you feel slightly human again. You manage to copy a paragraph from Peter Lombard without crying. You even eat a bite of stewed apple, an apology offering from Thomas, who still thinks your cheese psalm was brilliant. As the candle gutters low and your roommates settle in for the night, someone whispers, "Next time less ale." Someone else mutters, "Next time more bread." You just close your eyes and promise yourself that next time you'll drink water before bed. You won't, but you mean well. It's after dark and your candle is nearly spent. The dorm is quiet, too quiet. No lute, no muttering, no one snoring with the intensity of a failing church bell. You glance at your roommates. Both are missing. Again, you wait a bit. Maybe they're at evening prayer. Maybe they're arguing in the refectory over the metaphysical status of frogs. Maybe they're sneaking out to one of the town's lesser-known taverns, the kind that doesn't have a sign, but everyone somehow knows anyway. But when you step outside and follow the shadowed alleys, you hear something that doesn't sound like prayer or beer-induced chant. It's Latin, yes, but whispered, intense. You creep closer and peer through a cracked wooden shutter into what looks like a storage room full of students. They're seated in a circle. One reads aloud from a banned commentary. You hear the name Averroes. Your heart skips. This is no ordinary study group. This is a Societas Secreta, a secret student society. And you've just found it. These clandestine groups are part study club, part rebellion, part desperate cry for stimulation beyond the university's sanctioned syllabi. Officially, they don't exist. Unofficially, they're everywhere. Some debate theology. Some dabble in alchemy. Others simply gather to read the wrong books, the ones banned by the bishop, the ones with dangerous ideas. Like that, the soul might not be naturally immortal, unless aided by divine grace. Gasp. You slip inside and sit in the back unnoticed at first. The speaker is dissecting an argument about double truth, whether something can be true in philosophy, but false in religion. It's forbidden territory. Exciting and deeply confusing. You pretend to understand. Everyone does. Later, someone passes a small jug of something stronger than ale. You sip. It tastes like fermented raisins and regret. Another student introduces a dice game, beer dice. He calls it, except the scoring system involves Latin verbs, and anytime you misdecline a verb, you drink. Quirky fact. Secret societies weren't all about heresy and philosophy. Some were entirely absurd. At the University of Paris, a rumored group known as the Societas Porcorum, Society of Pigs, supposedly met to mock the seriousness of academic life, reciting absurd oaths and crowning a student pope of the swine. Historians still argue whether the group ever existed or was just a satirical invention. Either way, someone drew a pig in a mitre on a manuscript margin, and that's proof enough. The societies often operated on a code of mutual protection. What happens in the society stays in the society. If you see a fellow member reciting controversial Aristotle passages to pigeons, you mind your business. If someone brings in a love poem supposedly smuggled from Spain, you applaud, even if it's terrible. Your own group, it turns out, meets twice a week. They rotate locations, abandoned basements, forgotten storerooms, a candlelit nook behind the chapel's back wall. They use ciphers to post meeting notices. A small, etched symbol on a wall, a coded message slipped into a borrowed text. Tonight's meeting ends with a heated debate over the ethical responsibilities of astrologers. Someone insists that the stars determine everything, including when it's appropriate to borrow someone's ink without asking. You raise a hand and ask if Saturn is also responsible for your chronic hunger and ink stains. They laugh. You're in. Of course it's risky. If the university finds out, punishments could be severe. Not just signs or caps, but expulsion, or worse, an accusation of heresy. Heresy doesn't just stain your record, it ruins your prospects. No church job, no teaching license, possibly no freedom depending on how excited the inquisitor is that day. But for many students, the risk is worth it. Because let's face it, official lectures can be painfully dry. You're supposed to nod respectfully as a professor drones on about logic trees or divine attributes, without so much as a flicker of curiosity for the why behind it all. In these societies, you get to ask forbidden questions, challenge established thought, laugh, whisper, be human. You learn more too odd facts that don't show up in official lectures, like how some scholars believe dreams can be divine messages, or that certain ancient texts suggest the world is older than church doctrine says, or that there are entire treatises about love, longing, and beauty that aren't technically banned, just ignored. You sit beside Thomas, who grins as he jots down a few lines from a Sufi poem that somehow found its way from Andalusia to this freezing dorm town. This is what the university should be, he says. Less memorization, more thinking. You nod, even though you still have a page of Aquinas to copy before sunrise. Later, you sneak back to your dorm, cloak wrapped tightly, candle stub hidden in your sleeve. The streets are quiet, the night damp with fog. You pass the chapel, the shadows long and crooked. You wonder what the professors would say if they knew. But some do know. Some were part of these groups themselves decades earlier. Some turn a blind eye. Others hint subtly that they admire the curiosity. After all, they were students once. And here's the open debate. Did these secret societies contribute to the growth of Renaissance thought? Did they plant the seeds of humanism, skepticism, reform? Or were they just over-caffeinated, well-over-aled students avoiding their Latin homework? Historians can't agree. Maybe it was both. Back in the dorm, you find Martin asleep with a book over his face and a candle still flickering on the floor. You blow it out and smile. In your pocket, you've tucked a tiny folded page from tonight's meeting, a poem handwritten, unsigned. You read it once more before sleeping. It's messy. It's passionate. It asks if the soul like a flame flickers not just from divine wind, but from desire itself. It's probably heretical. it's also beautiful. And for the first time in weeks, you fall asleep not thinking about lectures or lice or stew. You fall asleep wondering. The bell doesn't ring this morning, not once, not twice, not at all. You lie there, blinking, in the cold dawn light, waiting for the familiar clang that calls you to prayer, to lecture, to another day of tired scribbling and warm ale. But instead, silence. Heavy, unnatural silence. It presses against your chest like an invisible weight. Then you hear the whispers. Your roommate, Martin, pokes his head in the doorway, pale and breathless. "No classes today," he mutters, almost reverently. Someone collapsed outside the chapel. Fever, boils, your heart drops. You don't need to hear more. You already know the name. Plague. It's not your first time hearing the rumors. Whispers have been drifting in from nearby villages for weeks. Traveling merchants with sunken eyes, parishes where the priest stopped showing up apothecaries, stocking extra juniper and wormwood. Still, you thought maybe it would miss you this time. It hasn't. By noon, the university quarter is in a quiet frenzy. Professors cancel lectures. Some students flee the city entirely, headed to family estates or distant monasteries. You watch a pair of Dominican scholars stride past, with rapt faces and satchels full of what look like herbs and wax tablets. They don't speak. You wonder if you're already infected. You sniffle. Is that a sign? Is your throat sore because you're getting sick? Or just because you spent last night reading aloud by candlelight, again in a room with zero ventilation and a mattress made of expired straw? The university doesn't have an official policy for plague days. There's no email alert, no lockdown procedure, just chaos and survival. Historians still argue whether universities handled plagues responsibly or disastrously. The answer, if you had to guess, is a bit of both. In some cities, schools shut down entirely. Professors fled. Students followed. Classes moved to private homes if they happened at all. In others, universities kept going. After all, what's a little pestilence compared to eternal ignorance? Yours falls somewhere in the middle. Classes are suspended until further notice. The phrase echoes across the town like a benediction. You should be relieved. No lectures, no exams, no punishment for not finishing your notes on metaphysical abstractionism. But you're not relieved. You're scared. People start disappearing. Quietly. A student you argued with last week gone. A tutor you passed in the street every morning, now a shuttered window. Some say they've just left town. Others say the burial teams are working at night to avoid panic. You stop asking. You and your roommates start keeping to yourselves. Meals become simpler. Cold bread, dry lentils, the occasional bite of salted fish if you're lucky. Someone smuggled in dried figs and you ration them like gold coins. Your appetite flickers like a candle uncertain. To pass time, you read. Slowly, carefully. You revisit texts you've memorized hoping for distraction. You try translating psalms into rustic rhymes. Thomas suggests writing a plague-themed love poem. You glare at him, but honestly, it helps. There's a strange stillness to the world now. The chapel bells are quiet. The streets are empty. You hear birds again, distant, puzzled. The university, once a buzzing hive of voices, arguments, footfalls, and groaning, has become a cathedral of silence. You write letters, though there's no guarantee they'll be delivered. Quills scratch across parchment like echoes in a tomb. To my brother, should he read this, tell mother I have not coughed. That's the whole note. You fold it and tuck it into your cloak. Then, one day, a professor knocks on your door. He's older, solemn, wrapped in too many scarves. Your disputation tutor has succumbed, he says plainly. We're redistributing assignments. And just like that, you're handed a new teacher, a stranger. One with a strange accent and yellowing fingers that smell of lavender and ink. He meets you in the open courtyard well away from buildings and lectures in brief spurts between coughs. You take notes with shaking hands. You wonder if he's already infected. You wonder if you are. Quirky detail. During major outbreaks, some universities assigned outdoor classrooms to continue studies while minimizing miasma exposure. Lectures were held under trees and cloisters, even on rooftops. One Oxford class was taught in a field surrounded by sheep because the local physician insisted their breath counteracts the poison in the air. You don't have sheep, but you do have fear. It becomes your companion. You watch your skin daily. You drink concoctions from the apothecary boiled sage vinegar garlic. You hang bundles of herbs by your door. You burn a small candle at your bedside and whisper to it at night. Others turn to prayer. The chapel is open again, but everyone stands far apart now, robes swaying in the wind, hands shaking as they cross themselves. You listen to the prayers, half believing, half hoping. The Latin feels heavier, now more urgent. Libera nos Domine. Deliver us, O Lord. One day Martin doesn't get out of bed. He's pale, feverish. He mumbles in his sleep. You call for help. 2 students arrive with cloths, water, and a tiny bottle of oil, blessed by someone's aunt who once saw a bishop sneeze and live. You care for him because you must, because he's your friend, because if the tables were turned, you'd want someone to sit beside you, even just to hold your hand and pretend everything will be fine. He survives, barely. You celebrate with weak broth and a moment of stunned silence. When the plague finally passes quietly like a thief, slipping out to the back gate, the university slowly reanimates. Bells return. Students drift back. Classes resume. Professors lecture with new fervor or with visible trauma behind their eyes. Not everyone returns. You count at least a dozen classmates missing. Some simply vanished. Others, you know. There are prayers for them in chapel. Brief, respectful. The names are read aloud, then filed into the registry. The scribe doesn't blink, and yet life returns. Notes are passed. Debates spark. Someone starts humming a drinking song. You flinch, then smile. Historians debate whether the plague improved the universities or weakened them. Some say it brought necessary reforms, reduced class sizes, more health precautions, even the development of actual dorm policies. Others argue it decimated faculties and shattered learning for generations. You only know this you survived. And somehow between fear and fever, between garlic wine and whispered psalms, you still learned. Maybe not what was written in the textbooks, but something deeper, something you'll carry forever. It starts like most arguments do, quietly. You're seated in the corner of the courtyard with your notes trying to summarize an impossibly long section of Augustine for tomorrow's disputation. The sun is finally shining for once, which should be nice. But instead of birdsong and scholarly focus, you hear voices. Raised voices. 2 students are standing under the archway, nose to nose, one gesturing wildly with a rolled-up parchment, the other crossing his arms in a way that says, I'm about to quote a church father, and I'm not afraid to use footnotes. You catch the key phrase, liberum arbitrium, free will. Oh boy. It's a debate over predestination. Again. You groan softly and return to your notes, but it's too late. One of the arguers yells, Hereticus is, and suddenly 3 more students join the fray. This is not uncommon. In fact, theological arguments were practically a contact sport in medieval universities. The tension between divine foreknowledge and human free will could boil over faster than a pot of lentils left unattended. It was the sort of debate that could go from academic to aggressive in about 4 syllables. You watch as one student slams their book shut and jabs a finger in the air. Si Deus omnia praevidet tunc voluntas est nihil. If God foresees everything, then will is nothing. Another yells back, Et tamen nos eligimus malum, and yet we choose evil. Then someone throws a crust of bread. It escalates rapidly. Now it's a full-blown brawl. Quills are flying. A bench tips over. Someone brandishes a crucifix, not as a weapon but with great moral outrage. Another student, clearly just passing through, tries to duck out, and still ends up with ink on his robe. You sigh, tuck your notes into your sleeve, and walk slowly around the chaos. This is your 4th theological fistfight this semester. Historians still argue whether medieval students were genuinely this pugnacious, or whether the surviving accounts are exaggerated. Either way, student records from Paris and Bologna frequently mention physical altercations during or after disputations. Some fights were about doctrine. Some were about honor. Some were probably about stew, let's be honest. At their heart, these arguments weren't just about theology. They were about identity. Your views on grace will knowledge even the structure of the soul. These shaped not just your education, but your sense of self. They determined where you stood, who your allies were, and whether or not you'd get punched before lunch. Today's fight ends when the proctor appears. He's not a large man, but his presence carries weight. His robe sways like judgment, and his glare could curdle milk. The students freeze mid-squabble. One of them still holds a theology text like a shield. Gentlemen, the proctor says slowly, if Aquinas wished to be used as a bludgeon, he would have said so. No one laughs. Punishments are swift public apologies in Latin, a day of library cleaning duty, and a forced group reading of Gregory the Great, together, out loud, in the cold. You find it all exhausting. You return to your dorm, toss your notes onto your straw mattress, and rub your temples. Tommy walks in, grinning. Did you see that punch Bertram landed right in the middle of the Pelagian clause? You're insane, you mutter. He deserved it. Thomas shrugs. He called Bernard of Clairvaux a sentimental monk, which he was, you point out. Thomas just nods, as if this proves his point instead. But here's the truth. You've been in those arguments too. Maybe not throwing fists, but throwing logic quotations, carefully crafted rebuttals. You've stayed up late crafting a counterpoint to the claim that God's grace is irresistible. You've questioned whether knowing something will happen means causing it. You've even started doubting your own conclusions halfway through saying them aloud. Because theology isn't just about answers, it's about wrestling with questions so big they don't fit in your head. You remember a tutor once said, if you don't come away from a theological debate slightly confused and vaguely humbled, you weren't listening hard enough. Quirky fact, some universities held official disputatio tournaments. Students competed in rounds advancing through topics ranging from the immortality of the soul to whether angels could occupy the same space. Winners sometimes received symbolic prizes like a loaf of blessed bread or a feather quill dipped in red ink to signify intellectual bloodshed. Sometimes the tournaments got so heated that campus authorities had to intervene not to stop the debates, but to time them. You once witnessed a final round disputation end with both participants too exhausted to walk. They were carried back to their rooms like knights returning from a battlefield. their only weapons Latin and stubbornness. But despite the chaos you learn to articulate, to listen, to revise. You learn that I don't know is a legitimate position, as long as you can explain why you don't know it yet, and you start to realize something odd. The arguments that make you sweat, that raise your voice, that unravel your confidence, they stick with you. You remember them. They shape your thinking. You once argued that free will must exist because sin without choice is injustice. Your opponent countered that divine omniscience removes the element of surprise. You still don't know who was right. But you can quote both sides now, and sometimes you quote both to yourself out loud while walking to class, like a philosopher with unresolved trauma. It's exhausting. It's also thrilling. Later that evening, you and your roommates sit around a candle rehashing the day's drama. Martin insists that the soul cannot be subject to motion if it's immaterial. Thomas draws a diagram of the human will shaped like a fish. You all laugh, then fall quiet, because you're starting to get it. Not the answers, but the shape of the questions. You fall asleep thinking about grace and fate, and that one line from Augustine, "Give me chastity and continence." But not yet. He would have fit right in here. Your candle flickers. Not poetically, just inconveniently. It's dripping wax all over your only halfway legible page of notes, the ink still drying from that paragraph you recopied after spilling stew on the first attempt. Outside, the wind moans through the shutters, and your fingers are so cold that your quill keeps slipping. Again. This is what studying looks like tonight, slouched over a splintery table. Parchment piled like crumpled dreams trying to make sense of a dense commentary on the soul's appetitive powers, while your nose runs and your breath fogs in front of your face, because it's winter. Again. And there's no sun. Again. And no light, unless you make it. You're studying by moonlight, literally. Tonight the moon is full. That helps. You cracked open the shutters a bit to let the glow in. You've even dragged your desk closer to the window to take advantage of the extra luminance. It's better than wasting another candle stub, though. If it gets much colder, your ink's going to freeze. This is what most students in your position do: improvise. Study hours aren't scheduled, they're stolen. The university doesn't hand out study lamps or wax rations. If you're lucky, you've hoarded a few half-burned candles. If you're very lucky, you have a sand-filled timer you can flip, hoping it reminds you to rest your eyes before permanent squint sets in. But mostly, it's about the moon. People laugh about moonlighting now, but back then, it's literal. You've actually found yourself trying to position your textbook, well-copied notes of a textbook, in the exact beam of moonlight, streaming through a narrow slit in the stone wall. Sometimes you forget what you're even reading and just marvel at how the moon can light words written by someone who died centuries ago. Quirky detail. Some students tried to time their study schedules by lunar phase. A full moon meant maximum visibility, and therefore peak productivity. New moon, built-in excuse. No, Master Allah. I couldn't possibly finish the reading. The moon was absent, and my candle was stolen. Surely the heavens themselves dictate my academic calendar. Did it work? Sometimes. You shift positions. Your lower back pops audibly. It's been hours. Your candle, the one you swore not to light, is now lit anyway. It sits in a squat little iron holder melting into its base. Every time it sputters, you feel a flicker of panic, because you don't know when you'll get another. The apothecary's wax supply has been unreliable, and Martin keeps borrowing your extras for emergencies, like finishing love letters to girls who may not actually exist. Meanwhile, across the room, Thomas is snoring, loudly, one arm flopped over a book he fell asleep on. You've told him a dozen times that parchment doesn't absorb knowledge by osmosis, but he insists that sleeping in physical proximity to wisdom can't hurt. You tried it once. All you got was a sore neck and ink on your face. The worst part of studying at night isn't the lighting, it's the fire hazard. Candles, parchment, and wool robes don't mix well. You know at least 2 students who caught their sleeves on fire while gesturing during a particularly passionate bit of Aquinas. The smell of singed wool and moral panic lingered in the dorm for days. In fact, one unfortunate soul once fell asleep with a candle still burning. His manuscript caught fire. He woke up, screamed, and flung it across the room. It smacked the wall and left a flaming streak down the stone. He lost 3 months of notes, part of a commentary on Boethius, and half his eyebrows. To this day, he's referred to as Brother Flamma. You're not entirely convinced, he minds. You glance back at your own notes. Ink's fading. The parchment's wrinkled. Your handwriting is sloping downhill, like it's trying to escape the page. You take a break, flex your fingers, and look up at the moon. And then, just for a second, you wonder if this is it. If this is the moment, 500 years from now, someone will imagine when they read your marginalia and wonder who you were. Will they notice where your ink blotched? Will they laugh at your doodle of a monk jousting a snail? Will they care that you were cold, exhausted, and deeply unsure about your answer to whether the soul's will is inherently good? Historians still argue how much of the surviving marginalia were sincere versus sarcastic. Some insist those tiny drawings and odd notations were expressions of joy or curiosity or frustration. Others say they were just medieval graffiti, the equivalent of carving your name into a desk. You hope it's the former. You add a little scribble at the edge of your page. A student holding a candle that's clearly burning both ends. Subtle. Then back to work. The thing is, even now, even in this dim, flickering, uncomfortable moment, you kind of love it. Not the cold, not the hunger, not the sense that your spine is slowly fusing into the shape of a question mark. But the thinking, the challenge, the hope that maybe somewhere in these cramped lines you'll find something real, something that makes sense. You write another sentence, then another, and another. You lose track of time. The candle gutters. The moon moves, slanting its light across the floor like a clock that doesn't tell hours, only fatigue. Eventually, your head dips. Your eyes blur. You stop trying to keep them open. You wake up with your face stuck to parchment ink, smudged across your cheek, and a line of Latin running down your chin like a tattoo. You curse softly, then smile. You're learning, not just theology or logic, but how to endure, how to think under pressure, how to make meaning in the dark. And somehow, despite everything, you don't regret staying up. Well, maybe a little, but that's tomorrow's problem. Your robe smells like smoke. Your fingers are stained with ink, and your back feels like it's aged a century. But none of that matters today, because you're finally close. Not to glory, not to riches, but to graduation, or at least the medieval approximation of it. No caps, no gowns, no inspirational speeches from minor nobles. Just more parchment, more tests, and maybe if you're lucky, a formal licentia docendi license to teach, scrawled in exquisite Latin that no one outside the university will understand. You didn't start here. No one starts at graduation. You started, remember, freezing on a straw mattress, squinting at Latin verbs and wondering if your candle would last long enough to finish copying Aristotle's convoluted opinions on motion. Now, years later, you've survived plague penance, predestination brawls, and a truly questionable amount of boiled cabbage. So, what does it take to finish? Years, usually 7 to 10, depending on your faculty. The arts course, the foundation for theology, law, or medicine, takes around 4 to 6 years. After that, if you want to keep climbing, you enter advanced study. Some students never leave. They linger like ghosts, gathering degrees and dodging responsibility. They're called eternal scholars. You know one who's been graduating soon for the last 9 years. Your own path is almost at its end. You've completed the required disputations, passed the exams, or at least talked your way through them without crying in public. You've spent countless hours copying texts, debating in Latin, and perfecting your formal address in case you're ever asked to deliver a sermon or lecture. Now it's time for the determinatio, the final hurdle. This is the exam to beat all exams of formal public disputation before a panel of faculty. You'll present a thesis, argue your case, defend it against every attack they throw at you, and do it all in precise, elegant Latin. The entire university might attend. There may be food afterward. Or not. Depends on the dean. You've prepared for months. You've rewritten your argument a dozen times. You've practiced responses in front of the mirror, your roommates, and the chapel cat. Today, you stand in the hall, heart racing. You wear your best robe clean, pressed, patched only in the back where no one can see. Your hands are sweating so badly you fear you'll drop your parchment. The panel sits before you professors each with a face like an icon. Stoic, stern, not unkind, but unreadable. One taps a quill. Another adjusts their spectacles. A third clears their throat with a sound like 1,000 judgments. Begin, says the moderator. You take a deep breath and start. Your thesis. An voluntas hominis, sine gratia divina liberam manere potest. Whether the human will can remain free without divine grace. Bold, risky. You know it, they know it. You lay out your points. Slowly, clearly. Your Latin is smoother now than it used to be. You've found the rhythm of it like poetry with teeth. Then come the objections. They hammer you. One quotes Aquinas. Another counters with Augustine. Someone references an obscure Byzantine thinker you've never even heard of. You think they're bluffing, but you're not about to call them out. You respond. Not perfectly, but well enough. You reference scripture commentaries, analogies involving light, and mirrors, and crooked roads. You nearly cry, but from adrenaline, not fear. You keep going. At one point, someone challenges your phrasing. You correct yourself mid-sentence. It's subtle, elegant. One of the professors actually nods. Hours pass. Finally, they dismiss you. You bow. You leave the hall. You collapse on a bench, heart pounding, legs weak. It's done. You've completed everything. And now, you wait. The results will come later, announced at vespers or posted in the refectory. If you pass, you'll be granted the licentia marking you as a magister, a master. If not, well, you try again next year. Quirky bit of trivia. In some universities, graduates received literal garlands, wreaths of laurel or ivy. Others were given a symbolic book, and a kiss of peace from the dean. At Bologna, you might even be lifted onto a chair and paraded around the square, briefly, with risk of dropping. You spend the evening in a daze. Your roommates offer you dried fruit in celebration. You accept chewing slowly, still unsure if you passed. Martin insists you did. Thomas says he'll write a song either way. A tragedy if you fail. A comedy if you pass. You don't sleep well. You dream of speaking Latin and forgetting your verbs mid-sentence. You dream of professors turning into birds. You dream of the university vanishing while you recite psalms to an empty room. In the morning, the verdict arrives. You passed. Barely, but enough. You read the notice 3 times to be sure. Your name spelled correctly. The note of success formal and impersonal, but clear. You're now a master. You don't feel different. Your robe still itches. Your shoes still have holes. But something inside you settles. You did it. What now? That depends. Some graduates stay and teach, joining the very faculty they used to dread. Others travel seeking posts at monasteries, cathedral schools, courts. A few enter the church. Some wander lecturing at different universities, gaining reputation and followers like scholarly troubadours. And some, burned out or disillusioned, walk away entirely. They go home, open shops, marry, become town scribes or advisors, or quiet thinkers with 1,000 unfinished ideas. There's no job guarantee, no salary promise, just a title, a piece of parchment, and a mind full of difficult questions. You decide to stay for a while, teach a few lessons, copy a few more texts, rest, and maybe, just maybe, enjoy a morning without rushing to chapel, a meal without memorizing logical proofs, and a night without candle wax in your hair. For now, that's enough. You fold your robe carefully. You step outside. The sky is clear, and for the first time in a decade, there's no lecture waiting, just possibility. You wake up late. Not scandalously late, just you miss the morning bell, and nobody cared late. And that alone tells you everything has changed. There's no lecture to rush to, no parchment to copy before sundown, no pages of Aquinas haunting the edge of your consciousness. You're a graduate now. Technically. You sit up slowly, stretch your aching back, and let the sunlight warm your face. It's not much filtered through a cracked wooden shutter, but it feels different, brighter, less like judgment and more like, well, possibility. You don't even reach for your quill. It's still there, of course, lying beside a half-written page of notes you started before your final disputation. You may never finish that one. And honestly, that's okay. There's no ceremony, no grand farewell. Just a quiet shift from student to scholar, marked more by absence than celebration. No one comes to collect your robe or swap it for a cap. Your dorm looks exactly the same, cramped, musty, cluttered with parchment scraps and dried-out ink pots. But now it's a relic of your past. You stand in the courtyard later that morning, watching younger students shuffle to class, yawning, clutching their parchment like battle standards. You smile, not smugly, but gently. You've been there. The candle burns. The forgotten conjugation. The sudden terror of being called on and realizing your brain is made of bees. All of it. Thomas walks up beside you, still chewing something. You're free. Now, he says with his mouth half full. What will you do? Travel, teach. Get very serious about becoming a hermit. You shrug. Haven't decided yet. Might just nap. You've earned it. And that's true. You've survived university in an era with no coffee, no light bulbs, no printed books, and more lice than logic. You endured bone-chilling winters, half-cooked lentils, logic exams that made your ears ring, and at least one minor exorcism during lecture. But what now? Well, you've got your licentia docendi, your license to teach. That sounds impressive, but it's just the beginning. If you want to keep studying, you'll need to attach yourself to a cathedral, a monastery, or a court. Maybe teach under a more senior scholar. Maybe publish well hand copy your own commentary. Except here's the secret: no one told you your degree doesn't guarantee anything. There's no job board, no employer waiting with a contract and a bag of coins. You have to network, to petition, to hope your former tutors put in a good word. You might get hired at a school with 15 students and no roof, or not at all. You might end up tutoring the son of a nobleman who can barely read his own name but thinks Latin is a type of meat. One student ahead of you graduated last year, and now earns coin drawing up contracts for local merchants. He sighs wistfully every time someone mentions metaphysics. Another opened a bookstall. Another joined the clergy. Another vanished entirely rumored to have run off with a nun who loved logic. And you're not sure yet. For now, you decide to clean. Your desk is a disaster. Layers of wax hardened like medieval sediment, ink pots long since dried into fossilized lumps, bits of parchment with phrases like voluntas divina and cave porcum beware the pig. One page just says, remember to eat, in a slightly desperate scrawl. You find old marginalia, your own and others. Little drawings of dragons, doodles of professors with exaggerated noses, a diagram trying to explain grace using bread and weather patterns. It makes no sense. You laugh. And tucked inside an old commentary you find your first ever Latin notes. The handwriting is atrocious, the spelling worse. You read them with affection, like visiting an old version of yourself you forgot existed. You were scared back then, lost, cold, hungry. You didn't know if you'd last a week. And now you know things. Not just facts or arguments, but how to think, how to reason through a question without panicking, how to ask something and not always need an answer. You know that Boethius made sense once briefly around midnight. You know that sometimes you misspoke in class and the world didn't end. You know how to argue about free will without punching someone. That's progress. Outside, the chapel bell rings. Vespers. The sun's fading. Your final day as a student is slipping into the past. You step outside and breathe. The air smells like damp stone and possibility. Your roommates are already making jokes about stealing your bed now that you're official. Martin offers you a chunk of fig bread in farewell. Thomas tells you he's rewriting your final disputation into a romantic ballad. You suspect he's serious. Before you leave, you walk to the edge of the university quarter, where the stone gives way to dirt, where your world has always ended. And you keep walking, just a little further. Not because you have a destination, but because now, finally, you're allowed to choose one. Wind down 300 words. And now, as the echo of those last steps fades, and the night settles gently over the crooked rooftops of your university town, you pause. Take a deep breath. Feel the quiet around you. There are no more lectures, no more last-minute notes to copy, no more tense debates that leave you blinking under candlelight, wondering if logic is a gift or a punishment. Just Stillness. You sit maybe on a worn stone bench, maybe on the edge of a wooden bed frame with scratchy linen. The straw beneath you sighs. A gentle breeze wafts through the shutters, rustling parchment, carrying with it the scent of wax and old books and maybe faintly stew. You smile, because somehow you made it. Through the sleepless nights, the exams, the meals that tasted like boiled regret, through the ink stains and plague scares, the whispering societies, and logic battles that sometimes turned into actual brawls. Through all of it, you made it. Not because it was easy, not because you always knew what you were doing, but because you kept going. You learned even when you didn't know you were learning. You grew even when your knees were cold and your candle was gone. And now, all that struggle, all those pages, all those hours, they belong to you. You lie back, you exhale. And for the first time in a very long time, you sleep. Deep, dreamless, safe.